Yes. Uh, well, welcome after this very interesting and fun talk. I would like to ask Robert to the stage to the Q&A. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you for your fun talk. Like I said in the backstage, I couldn't stop smiling. It was really, really interesting. And I think everyone in the chat also really enjoyed it. So we're going to start with some questions from the chat. Um, One of them is how can you best avoid accidental distortions? Because we saw the plot with the cow, um, which is not an accidental distortion, but how can you avoid the accidental ones?
I don't know if I have an answer to that because it's really a choice. Like in these charts, you choose to represent things in ways that are unusual, and usually these aren't made with the usual tools. Like you're not using Tableau or D3 or anything like that, or whatever your tool of choice is. So you're not going to it's I don't think there is tool here, because this is all one part of the question here, is any good tool recommendations. And I was as I was saying later in the talk also, I don't think a tool can help you with that. I mean, other than like Illustrator, but of course this is like it's essentially you making all the decisions. So a tool can say, oh, this is a chart about this and that, let's put a cow in there, or let's do something else with that. That's unusual. So I think it's sort of like the opposite of tools. It's like you have to step out of them and do something different. And I don't think I'm not aware of any tool that would help you with accidental distortions. You have to just be careful, and you have to be aware that you might be distorting things, but then you might want to do this on purpose. Like if you want to overemphasize some things, like in that chart of the women's heights, then you can do that too. I mean, it's a choice sometimes, and usually it's a bad idea, but it can be what you're after, and then you can do it if that's what you want to do, or if you if you do it by accident.
Okay, thank you. So basically, you're just saying that it's more about the creativity rather than just a standard in the tool. So
Yeah.
that brings me to the next question. My rule of thumb as a designer is that a fun chart will be more memorable and recognizable, while boring is more apt for analysis. What do you think?
Yes, for sure. So that's really an interesting comparison, or a way of putting it, because for analysis, you don't usually care about unusual charts or memorable charts, because the analysis, you go through a lot of different steps and you don't care to remember each individual one of them. But for presentation, or for something that you want to present to somebody as some kind of piece that they will remember, either as a piece of communication or marketing or whatever, you want people to remember those, and so those then should be unusual to an extent so that they stick out and stick in your memory. So that's certainly true. So a fun chart is going to be much more memorable, much more interesting to look at. It's going to get more eyeballs, I guess, than your run-of-the-mill chart. But you don't need those, and you don't actually really want them for analysis.
Okay. There was one comment about 3D pie charts. And the wondering, are they bad?
No, not in general. So the thing is that a lot of people think that 3D charts in general and 3D pie charts. Okay, I thought this was bar charts. Sorry, I misread this. 3D pie charts, they're not always bad. So 3D pie charts can be bad for sure when you over emphasize like the angle. Like if you have sorry, I have to do this with my hand. So this is a 2D pie chart. You look at it straight on, and then if you tilt it, let's say back, then the part that's closer to you is going to be larger, right? So you get this distortion, and that is true if you're using perspective projection, but you could be using isometric projection, or what is called parallel projection, and then it wouldn't actually happen. And actually, I ran a study where I used that fact to study or to figure out what visual cue people use to read pie charts, because in that case, the angles get distorted, and the dam, or the perimeter of the of the ellipse, but not the area. The area actually stays the same. And so depending on the projection, it might not be a big problem. And if you just don't, like you can just do a very subtle tilt back and it doesn't have to go all the way, then it's actually impossible to tell apart. Like I've spent some time staring at 3D pie charts at different angles, and it turns out when a chart is tilted back slightly, it actually looks more correct than when it's actually 2D. So whether it's more, don't remember if people had any trouble reading those or not, but I think it doesn't have to be a problem. It's just a matter of overdoing it. So if you do a lot of tilting, then it's going to be a problem. But if it's just a little bit, or you just add sort of like a 3D cue to it, but don't actually change the perspective, I don't think it's a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. For the next question, can you differentiate between chart embellishments, like the cow, and unusual chart types, like the rose plots, connected scatters, in terms of potential pros and cons, and in terms of accuracy and memorability?
Interesting. I don't know if there's a difference in memorability. I can imagine that embellishments. Well, it depends. So unusual charts, as in the connected scatter plot, for example, there's actually no reason why that would be any less accurate than any other chart. It's actually a pretty effective chart. Unusual charts, as in the erectile dysfunction bar chart with the curved bars, that's a different matter, because now the bars are curving away from each other, and so if you're really after accuracy, which you really aren't in this case, but if you were, then that would be much harder to actually make the comparison. I don't think there is an overall rule, but I would think that there's no overall rule for sure, because you can do embellishments carefully and tastefully, and that way not cause much harm, or you can do it really badly and it can get into the territory where you're just basically messing with the chart and then its perception, and then it's really hard to read it or read it correctly. So it's an interesting distinction, but I don't know if there are sort of rules that apply separately to each one or to either one.
Okay, thank you. For the next one, do you think we should err on the side of assuming that the audience is smart, or make charts simpler as not to confuse?
I would like to hope that we can assume the audience is smart. I mean, it's always easy to say that, oh, you could misread this thing this way or that way, but you can do this with almost anything. So if you don't trust your audience at all, then yeah, you have to be very careful with these things. But I think that in general, I would hope that we can trust the audience to be smart enough to understand these things. And so, for example, with the cow chart, the different heights of the bars and the cow aren't perfectly comparable, but you would think that the audience would get that and wouldn't try to like go and like measure the pixel height of the cow and take that as a numerical value. So I think there's a certain assumption, I think, that would come from these embellished charts, that you wouldn't overinterpret them, hopefully, and get the idea why you're doing this, and not just sort of like be entirely like dumb about it and follow some kind of mechanical rule like a machine that wouldn't understand that.
Okay, thank you. A more elaborate question. What are your thoughts on sonifications and the examples that we maybe saw earlier today, in terms of their effect to aiding cognition and memory to these type of unusual charts?
Well, that question was asked in that other talk too, and I would be curious too. I don't know. Like, I haven't seen any of that work, so I don't know. I can imagine a combination perhaps being effective, especially if you're I don't know. I'm just thinking, because there is certainly like you could actually like do sonification of the actual data, but I wonder if a more effective way of doing this would be to have some sort of more of a melody or something that isn't necessarily a representation of the data, but more connected to the subject matter. So I don't know. I can't say either way whether it would make any difference or whether it would be affected. It might be, but it would be interesting to find out. But I don't know.
Yeah, but I think this might also be more towards kind of like the memorability aspect. So kind of like doing that combination, especially because like the memory is also affected. So maybe the question is more
Right.
towards there, like making that combination with it, like it stands out now just visually. Making the combination with sound might. What do you think it will also affect maybe your perception or cognition and the memorability?
But it would certainly stand out. Like if you that for sure. The thing about auditory memory is that it's actually very poor. So I would not expect our ability to remember sort of the melody or the sonification to be very accurate, but it might be that you would remember the overall shape. And so then that could be something that could help you remember what you saw visually too, so that you could have sort of two different channels that might play together. Yeah. I haven't seen any of the research, but it certainly is an interesting question to ask. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One further question is, what is the most misused chart that you encountered?
That is an interesting question. I guess it's probably not that hard. It's probably the pie chart, because people just like pie charts and tend to use it for things that it's not good for, which then a lot of people sort of turn around to say, well, pie charts are bad. But I think that's not the problem. The pie chart itself isn't the problem. The way people misuse it is really the problem. I don't know if somebody were to make an actual, like, try to do sort of like a survey, how many charts are being generated, and depending on what your definition is of misuse, because it could be that it's just like a bad use on this data, or it could be used to misrepresent the data, which you can do with any chart, and then it might be something else. Maybe it's line charts, maybe it's maps. Actually, I would think that maps are probably a contender for pie charts, because people also love maps. And so a lot of maps are just really bad too. Not because maps are bad, but because people just make bad maps. Or they make maps that aren't meaningful because they all just like show you population density and the things that Ken Field just talked about. So yeah, those are probably my two contenders, pie charts and maps.
Pie charts and maps. Okay. Well, there's a lot of discussion in the chat about how to apply sonification to make your charts stand out. So if you would like to join them at some point, I think they will be very interested on your takes. But for now, there's no more questions that I see. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining the stage with me and for your amazing talk.
Thank you.
And you enjoy the rest of the conference.